Welcome back, listeners. So just a little recap, segment one, Allie. We talked about the high-speed planters and corn, and certainly, I get a lot of questions, from growers about, what are other guys saying about it? What do you think? And, certainly these things have a major price tag on them. And Allie, I know you have a lot of growers too that are taking the retrofit, angle. That working out okay from a cost standpoint from what you're hearing?
Yeah, it tends to be coming in as maybe a cheaper option, just utilizing what you already have, but just also ramping up the amount of speed that you're able to plant these acres at as we roll into spring. So.
Yep. And any feedback I get from growers, once they get converted to this system, I don't think there's any looking back. Most growers I have been really positive about it in most cases. With a couple of challenging springs, if they're looking at, hey, I'm getting planted, 15, 20% faster than taking a look at some of the yield curves on planting date, boy, it's some pretty significant return on investment when you start running some of that math across how many acres you're getting planted.
Well, yeah, and you look at early planting in general. So arguably, we've talked about the benefits of if you could be planting corn and soybeans at the same time. Obviously, that would be ideal, but in a lot of situations, we're not able to do that. So arguably, you could plant either one of these first. But I think another big piece of early planting too is even if you start to look at maybe the corn silage sector of our industry, here in Southeast Minnesota, we work with quite a few different dairies. And I think the ability to just plant your acres a little bit more timely so that your moisture is sitting where you need it to be this fall is a really nice piece of this as well. So we've talked a lot about, maybe the differences in speed of some of these planters. We started to dabble in a little bit more about singulation, but really I think as we start to focus here a little bit more in this segment, soybean singulation and just the populations in general, we've started to push lower populations than maybe we've seen in the past. So just maybe walk us through some of the supporting materials we have that support what we need spacing wise in soybeans. Yeah,
it's interesting, and I got a little bit intrigued about soybean singulation population. Doing yield estimations in soybeans, it really isn't a common practice that even you or I or even growers go out and do, where we love doing it with corn, and we have apps that you can do with corn. Take a picture with a Pioneer Seeds app, which is pretty awesome. But I did an FFA project down south of Harmony here last fall, and we actually went out and did the exercise of determining soybeans, yield estimations, and it includes a formula of just harvesting so many feet of a single row and doing some math. And when we were all done, this was a small area, one variety. It kind of jumped out at me just how big of a range the yield was. So we had a low yield of 51.97 and a high of 95.8. And then the other two were 85.03 and 69.22. And when we got done, I really hadn't really looked at, what did the samples look like when we pulled them. And when I kind of circled back to all the kids, what really stood out to me was the high yield checks had really good spacing. Where the ones that were lower, there was 3-4 plants that were bunched together, and then there was a gap. And sometimes when they're bunched together, they're spindly. There's not many pods that had a low seed count per pod on average. And it kind of intrigued me where, I'd kind of heard some people talking about singulation, high speed, lower populations, that there could be some correlation to that. And certainly, Allie, when you think about singulation, it does play a big role. We talk a lot about seed treatment, protect your plants so we don't lose them. But in this Iowa State study, they did compare. In this case, they compared the ExactEmerge John Deere system to the Speed 2 from Precision. And even if the two systems had a massively wide range of results of plant death.
Yeah, so the soybean survival rate comparison between the two high-speed planters, like you mentioned, just showed that high-speed planters, that because they're providing that true singulation, really even spacing in soybeans, they have a higher soybean survival rate because we aren't throwing as many, maybe seed doubles, and we're not crowding those plants, which, coming back to your activity you did with the FFA, that all sticks true to what we're talking about here, because we saw that in those plants that were more crowded, they had those lower pod counts, and then ultimately that reduced yield. So it is just something to take into consideration as another huge piece of the puzzle as we maybe consider some of these planters.
Yeah, and I think when you think about this, we've talked about corn singulation for way more than a decade, the importance of this. And really, soybeans, we talk about it. It can range from a controlled spill through a drill to using planter tech. We have such a wide range of planting technology that's still used on soybeans where, maybe some more work on this. I'm kind of intrigued about looking at, using these high-speed systems and then looking at different populations. But I think really what it's starting to boil down to is, we really don't need to be planting more than 140,000, seeds per acre. But maybe in some cases, when you look at the exact emerge, in this case, which was delivering on average, 83 to 84% survival rate with good singulation. I mean, that's pretty tremendous. I mean, when you talk about 90% germ and they were, keeping 3 to 5% of it consistently, you pair that together, that, maybe then dropping 130 becomes profitable. And it's something we'll have to take a look at, and it's something we'll look at for maybe some trials here this summer.
You've been listening to Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060. If you've missed part of the show or want to hear more, check out the show page at kfilradio.com or with the 103.1 KFIL app. Stay connected with Allie and Josh on Twitter. It's at Allie Gwise, WISE, and at Josh Schaffner to submit your questions for the show. Tune in next Wednesday for the next Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060. We'll see you at 11 a.m.